Hi, thanks so much for joining in. You're watching Infravisioning on BQ Prime. My name is Alex Matthew. This conversation is all about infrastructure. And the latest headline, I think, is the most topical to talk about this year. And that comes from the G20 summit that was recently concluded in New Delhi. It was the announcement of the India-Middle East-Europe corridor. What are the implications for India? How will this be constructed? How long will it take? All of that and more on this chat. Joining me is Vinayak Chatterjee, the founder and managing trustee of the Infravision Foundation. Thank you so much, Vinayak, for taking the time. Let's start with that big announcement. Would you agree that this is the largest such announcement in recent times?
I suspect it is so because, and under one umbrella to have an investment of this magnitude is probably right in saying it's the largest infra initiative ever announced by a group of countries together. The exact investment numbers, by the way, are still being worked out because these are all estimates right now. But the routing that has been shared in the public domain is about 8,200 kilometers, which starts from the line as presented in the media, starts from Mumbai port, connects by ship to Dubai port, from Dubai port overland to Israel, Haifa port in Israel by land, then from Haifa port to Greece by ship, then from Greece to Hamburg in Germany by combination of, I suspect, road and rail, because rail already exists and roads exist in Europe. Now, this is the alignment proposed to link India to the heart of industrialized Europe. And as you know, the acronym given is IMEEC, I-M-E-E-C, India, Middle East, Europe Corridor. So let me pause here before we move on to the other dimensions of this initiative.
So my understanding of this is, Vinayak, that a certain amount of infrastructure already exists. This will have to be augmented in years to come. And an MOU has been signed as of now between several countries, including India, European Union, Saudi Arabia, France, and also US. But it will require significant augmentation. What direction do you think that will take? And how much will India have to work on?
Look, I think the trick in the whole thing is not the quantum of investment, which I still have to figure out what it will take for the overland connections. You know, the complete link from Dubai to Haifa port, overland through Saudi Arabia, etc., and from the Greek port, the port in Greece to Hamburg. That portion, I don't think requires great infra because Europe already has a great network of inland waterways, roads, and rail. The ports are already in existence. So what looks like to be a major investment is what I would look at as the rail link from Dubai to Haifa port, running across the Arabian Peninsula, right from Dubai in UAE through Saudi Arabia into Haifa port. That seems to me the biggest chunk of infra. But the softer aspect is, honestly, the multimodalism involved. I think the softer dimensions of being able to transport cargo in a seamless manner with minimum paperwork, minimum customs checks, minimum delays in shifting from one mode to the other. To me, the softer aspects are more important in terms of each of the countries contributing to getting that process right. The hardware, to my mind, is easier delivered than the software of traversing almost 15 countries. You know, the link today traverses 15 countries. So at each point, border checkpoints, transshipment, loading, unloading, in fact, is, to my mind, the critical issue, that it is being done as seamlessly as possible. And by the way, there are already critics who are coming up, who are critically examining this whole concept. And one of the points that is being mentioned is that there are too many points of transshipment. For example, a container from Bombay will get loaded in Bombay, unloaded in Dubai from a ship, then loaded onto a rail in from Dubai to Haifa port, will be loaded onto a rail. Then from Haifa port in Israel to Greece will be ship again. Then from Greece to Hamburg will be road or rail. So there are almost 5-6 points of multimodalism, of shifting from one mode of transport to the other. And critics are already saying you load a container on a ship in Mumbai and it goes to Hamburg.
Right.
So, the Suez Canal. So what's the big deal? So we have to address these issues.
So, but then perhaps one could argue on the other side is that you're not necessarily sending all of the goods straight to Hamburg. You are also sending goods to several locations within that route, which is not possible for you to do on ship that takes you straight to Hamburg, right? But the other aspect that I want to ask you about is that we've heard announcements of this so-called New Silk Route of China, and I'm talking about the Belt and Road Initiative that has been spoken about for some time. Is this the answer to that New Silk Route?
You are asking a question loaded with geopolitics. so let's
That's my job. That's my job, Vinayak.
Well, it's my job to reply to that. So let's do that. You see, when China announced the Belt and Road Initiative, which I think was earlier called One Belt, One Road, OBOR, and then got changed to BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, it drew gasps from the rest of the world because I think the vision included over 100 countries, many of them small, poor, Asian or African continent countries. And China wanted to use that to demonstrate two aspects of its increasing global power. One, its diplomatic power by saying, look, we've got excellent contacts, we are dominant in trade, and we are creating a network that the world has not seen in the South-South, in the developing world. The second point China was trying to make is that we have the financial capacity to give low-cost debt to many of the countries that do not have the capacity to build these infrastructure, these ports, airports, road and rail links. So we are also, in some senses, a kind of a substitute at a country level for multilateral development banks. So there was a bundle of very strong messages and a very strong undertone of Chinese domination of the developing world through this initiative. Interestingly enough, while it generated the oohs and ahs, as we see it today, it has generated an equal amount of criticism. One, that it is a single country initiative as distinct from our IMEC initiative that we are discussing now. It was seen as a single country initiative. It was seen as vastly too ambitious in its scope to be meaningful. And three, the large portion of the criticism now is that it was willy-nilly enticing smaller, less developed countries without strong financial economic base to become beholden to China for funding its infrastructure, and in the process getting into debt that they had no great ability to repay. So you become indebted nationally to China. So all these criticisms have come in, and this seems to be the new initiative of IMEC announced at G20 seems to be a very interesting response to that initiative of China's. But we can go on and discuss this, but over to you.
No, certainly. So that is effectively what I wanted to get from you, that perspective on how this will compare to that. You mentioned that the hardware is not going to be too complicated, but all the same, assuming that there is a need to develop a certain portion of this, how long do you anticipate? And as somebody who has viewed infrastructure over the years, how soon is it possible for something like this to actually see the light of day?
It could be done in 3 years because honestly, there are no new ports to build.
Yeah.
All the ports are today operating ports. Mumbai, Dubai, Haifa, and I think the Prius port in Greece. They are all operating ports, which are anyway transshipping cargo or are shipping cargo in and out. So the real portion is the overland portion, and the bulk of the overland portion is the connectivity by rail or road, and I suspect it is rail from Dubai port to Haifa port in Israel. Now, I don't know the exact kilometerage, but if push comes to shove, a track that long can be built in 3 years. So,
would there be need to augment the capacity of the port in Mumbai, for example? Deepening of the port would it be required at all, or would you need to would you also need to have more operational ports on the western side?
So now this is what brings me to a larger issue. You're actually pointing me in a direction which raises some questions, that the line as presented on the media by the G20 Secretariat or whoever is presenting this to the media, the line starts from Mumbai. And, one of the partners and signatories to this whole, arrangement is Japan itself. So what I find is that there is a portion of South and Southeast Asia, that does not seem to be connected with the line as per what has been put out. And therefore, I would argue that the line should extend beyond Mumbai. It should connect India's new transshipment port in Kerala called Vinayak. It should certainly join up with Colombo port. It should tie up with Chittagong port. And, taken its stride, a little more eastward push to some of these Southeast Asian countries. It should also, as you know, there is also a proposed transshipment port that India is proposing in the Andamans, and that is expected to be operational by 2028. So I would actually start drawing the line from Andaman, India's new proposed transshipment port. Start drawing the line, encompass Chittagong, Colombo, Viringam in Kerala, Mumbai, and make the shipping route a larger play towards South and Southeast Asia. The second point I want to add, that this corridor should not only be about movement of physical goods. What we are seeing in the region is also a movement of energy. Today, India buys hydropower from Bhutan, and we sell coal thermal power to Bangladesh, right? And there is a talk of integrating electricity grids and even taking a dedicated line to Sri Lanka. So while all this talk is happening, I would urge the G20 nations to consider expanding the scope to include electricity transmission also in the region, but also a very important play on renewables, because, as the sun moves and it is becoming nightfall in places like Thailand, Vietnam, it is burning brightly in Rajasthan. Right. So there is a play where an entire region can more optimize solar by having an interconnected grid. So these considerations, since the plan is still being fleshed out, some of these considerations could be considered. But over to you.
Interesting. Okay. Now, my final question here would be not necessarily as part of this, but as an incidental development to this, is that obviously India is developing its own infrastructure, and its rail to ship infrastructure is developing even as we speak. Its roads are developing. If it turns out that this becomes a major corridor for trade and you have finished goods that move from India out, you would have to bolster the internal connectivity as well. What are the implications for infrastructure and major infrastructure projects at that in terms of the freight corridors within India?
Well, it's an interesting question, but I think we are on top of the game there.
Right.
As you know, both the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor and the Western Dedicated Freight Corridor are almost near completion and ready to start operation by the end of the year or early towards next year, right? Then there is a huge move in our national logistics plan to create a huge number of container freight stations and multimodal logistics parks. So I think internally our road networks are pretty good. So internally, I think we are well geared to, in a sense, link ourselves up domestically with this IMEEC initiative.
Fantastic. So I think we've covered quite a few bases. We will, of course, touch base once we get more clarity on the exact route that this will take and the investments therein. But Vinayak, as always, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Alex. Very topical article, very topical discussion right now.
Certainly. Viewers, there you have it. That's the conversation on the IMEEC, as it is called. Do let us know what you think in the comments. And meanwhile, stay tuned. Lots more coming up on BQ Prime.